All across America and around the world, this is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today Maurice Imhoff, a Michigan historian and author from the Jackson, Michigan area. Maurice, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Hi there, happy to be here.
Well, you've written a book that captured my eye, and I thought, well, this is this is local history I don't know, and I think that's what a lot of us recognize is there's so much local history we don't know, and I wanted to pass this along because I think all over the country there are these kinds of little historical nuggets none of us know about, and you have researched and ridden on the 1st Michigan Colored Infantry, later known as the 102nd USCT, which we'll explain that acronym in a minute. Let's start, Maurice, with how did you get interested in researching this particular subject, which goes all the way back to the Civil War?
Sure, yeah, it's a great subject. Great question to ask. I got involved at the Jackson Civil War muster in 2014, the largest Civil War living history event in the Midwest. My grandfather took me, and he was a big historian. I was not. We'd be talking history. I think some grandfathers can think telling your grandson about the history and how cool the railroad tracks are, things like that. And I'm looking out the window, staring off to the side, not paying any attention. So we go to the Civil War muster, which I did find interesting. But either way, he stepped away for a second to take a look at something else. I came across a group of African-American living historians, which stood out. I mean, they were the only ones, and they were a bunch together. And I got to know those guys, and before I knew it, I was wearing a jacket, a hat, and pants. And my grandfather came back looking for me, and I blended in with all camp, which was kind of funny.
Hey,
but,
what happened to him? I lost him. Where'd he go?
And he was doing that. He was looking left, looking right, putting his hand over his head, trying to block the sun. He was looking for me. And, to make the story a little shorter there, I joined, and the first year it was all about the battles. As a young guy, 14, I loved doing the reenactments, the musket, all that kind of stuff. That was awesome. But it was the second year when I visited the state archives in Lansing and got to view the 1st Michigan Colored Regiment's battle flag that had actually been in the service with them in the 1860s. And it was in poor condition. You're talking, battle scars, tattered condition. The silk had deteriorated. And I became interested in it because it hadn't really been researched that much. There was missing pieces from it, paint, scars. So I started digging into that research, and before I knew it, it kept going and going, and I became the state's head researcher on the subject.
Well, and it's really interesting. We have spoken to the gentleman down at in Lansing who heads up that Battle Flags group.
Yes.
And they recently had a film out on these battle flags, which is fantastic film. So we'd continue to recommend that to folks. Go to their website and just put in Michigan battle flags. You'll get there. You know, history is not really taught in our high schools and our colleges, and if it's taught, it's not taught in much depth. But by being in living history, if you will, in the reenactment,
Sure.
and feeling it and smelling it and having all those senses, it sort of ignited a spark and an interest, didn't it?
Absolutely. You get to seeing it as firsthand as you can, right? Because I can't travel back in time to the 1860s or to anyone else. So being able to actually go and do living history programs puts you in the feeling. And not only do we do some normal programs at libraries and such, but I've gone to some more full-on intense immersive events, so to speak, where there's no crowd. You have 500 guys out in the middle of the woods. I went to Bentonville just recently with about 6 of my guys, and we portrayed some of the men who of color who were corduroying roads, moving supplies, lifting logs, cutting down trees, and it really put you in the experience. And one of the funny things I like to say about that is, as much as cool as the experience was, my guys were not having it. It was not fun. I mean, you're talking like you'd march a mile or two, and then they'd stop, and they'd tell all the white soldiers stack your arms, such like that, and then they would call us black soldiers up and say, "All right, you guys need to go get the road fixed up ahead so we can move the men in the wagons." And my guys were mad because everyone else was taking a break. And I say, as interesting as it was to see them mad, it was cool to me to see them get mad, because that's what you would have saw back then in a way, right? You're seeing the difference of what was going on, I mean, firsthand to those young men. So now then, going as a writer and writing about the soldiers, it gave me, I could picture, as I'm reading letters and piecing the book together, the story, I could picture what it was like a little bit easier from someone else who had never done living history.
And so your book is called The First Michigan Colored Regiment, Free Men Who Fought Slavery. So put this in some context, Maurice. How many men were in the regiment? How did it even get formed?
Sure. So there was 1,400 men in the regiment, 1,446 to be specific. It's kind of weird that I know that off the top of my head, but that were joined in this regiment. 1,000 of those men were former slaves from the South who came up to Michigan and joined this regiment throughout that, at some point when they moved here. But it was formed by Colonel Henry Barnes in Detroit, Michigan, who was a large abolitionist. He ran the Detroit Advertiser and Tribune, which was the abolitionist newspaper there, the Republican paper, who was constantly writing about ending slavery in America, stopping the spread, and then also calling for the enlistment of black soldiers, which wasn't allowed.
That was a radical idea, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking, basically, by allowing men to, join the Union Army, you're calling them equal. And even here in Michigan, people weren't ready for that. People did not want that. Not the entire population, I should say, wanted that.
And were these men also armed? I mean, did they train as you might think an army group trains? And were they given arms and trained in how to shoot and fight and defend?
So at first, on the other parts of the nation, it started a little slow. They weren't willing to give them firearms and such, etc. But once the Emancipation Proclamation was passed by Lincoln, now they could legally raise troops, giving them arms, giving them everything. I mean, the full mighty of the U.S. government to enlist the soldiers. So they trained in Detroit at Camp Ward. They got Lorenz muskets to start with. Later got Springfield muskets. They did very well, and that was one of the thoughts, right? Are these guys going to do well? And what they found, I mean, as people learned, is if you teach them well, they're going to do well. In some parts of the nation, you had white leaders, officers who didn't care, didn't feel like they could do a good job, so they didn't train them well, right? They kind of just didn't care. Michigan's soldiers, leading officers, did care, and they understood that these men could make good soldiers, and they did. I mean, you can read stories in the newspaper from the 1860s about the men marching through the principal streets of Detroit, looking handsome, marching with their flag, with their arms and such shiny. So they did very, very well, making a strong presence here in Michigan, even going so far to when they went Niles, to the reporter who's writing about the regiments coming for a visit on a recruiting tour, and there's a couple copperheads, who aren't in favor of this, who are basically they're looking forward to just bashing the guy. They can't wait till they get there so they can laugh him off. And the reporter then wrote, after they left, these copperheads were blown away. They were so thrown that they didn't have any words almost. They changed their mind, because all they're reading is the stuff in the paper, right? Stuff nationally. Oh, they don't make good soldiers. All this, they have their own opinions. But once they saw it firsthand, that opinion completely changed, and that stood the test of time. And 180,000 black soldiers nationally took up arms and fought to end slavery in America.
Well, and that's something I wanted to get across too, because you got to put this in some context. I don't think, again, we don't teach history, so this is going all the way back to the Civil War. But 180 to, it's estimated, 200,000 African Americans fought for the Union in the Civil War. That made up 10% of the Army. Today, in today's Army, there are 95,000 African Americans in active duty, and that makes up 20% of today's Army. So, wow. There's been a long, continuous line of African Americans in the Army fighting and supporting this country. And when you go back to this point in time in the Civil War, where this was sort of the beginning and unusual, how did it work that they got called out of Michigan, and where did they go, and what did they do?
Sure. So since they were a federal regiment, or the colored troops, I should say, were federal regiments, they were segregated. So they were kind of raised as a state militia, as many of the other units were, the 21st Michigan Infantry, 20th, et cetera. So they were raised as the 1st Michigan Colored Regiment. However, once they got to D.C. in the Maryland area, they became federalized with the Bureau of the United States Colored Troops, segregated. So like another branch of the Army, so to speak, in today's times. So they became, or redesignated, I should say, as the 102nd United States Colored Troops. And that's that people often get confused. Are they two different groups? No, that's one unit. They just had their name changed. And the men actually didn't like that. While they liked being, soldiers in the Army and really respected, being federal troops too as well, that gives you even more, power, right? They felt disrespected that they were these colored soldiers. And I tell people, imagine there was a battle taking place. And if you can think of stories like this where you've heard, right? Imagine there's a battle taking place and the 20th Michigan Infantry whips the Rebs, right? They destroy the flank and they whip them down the hill and they ran them off. And, the other unit nearby, the Illinois guys would say, wow, those 20th Michigan boys, wow, they really whipped them and they saved the day, etc. Well, in this case, now they just became the colored soldiers, right? They don't know where they're from. They're no longer the Wolverine state, right? They're just the colored troops. So they felt a little upset about that, but they still carried on, that legacy of going by the 1st Michigan Colored Troops where they could.
Well, and the importance of being federalized and that recognition, again, at the time may not have seemed like much, but it opened up a lot of different opportunities, including there's in Arlington National Cemetery, there's a whole plot of graves related to those from the United States Colored Troops. And sure. They lost a little bit probably of that feeling of relationship to, Abraham Lincoln's famous quote, "Thank God for Michigan," right?
Yes.
The context of that is Michigan sending troops to aid the Union cause early on in the process. Where did the research come from? Talk to us about, it really takes years of combing
Sure.
through things to get this book to where you say, okay, now I got the history right, let me get it out into the public.
Right. I started researching in the newspapers, the Detroit Advertiser and Tribune, or I should say the Detroit Free Press. That's an interesting story in itself. I started with the Detroit Free Press because it was available online through newspapers.com, which news historians will know. And I was reading all about the regiment, finding these different stories through the paper and such like that. And I'll be honest, I couldn't believe what I was reading because the Detroit Free Press bashed this regiment. I mean, they have to go on a march and say they tore up the city. Nobody wants them here. Why is Michigan even raising the troops? They got their muskets, they threw them on the ground, so to speak. And what I learned as a younger guy, what I was missing there was that this was the Democratic paper, which was not in favor of having colored troops. So, in a media point of view, they wanted to tell the public that this was bad. And when I discovered the Detroit Advertiser and Tribune, it was a day and night difference between the stories.
Well, and that lesson rings true today, right?
Absolutely. I tell people I don't want to put anyone on blast, but you put Fox and CNN on, and sometimes you get completely different stories.
Absolutely.
And that is what you kind of see a little bit there. And so and I do as well as a historian. I make sure I'm reading through the bias, because even the Advertiser and Tribune is going to have a little bit of a bias, right? So I show that in my book. I do a chapter, I believe, it's called "Trouble at Camp Ward," which goes over a lot of the mischief that the soldiers did get themselves into. A variety of mischief, robbery. They got into fights at the camp.
I got news for you. Put a bunch of young bucks together in the Army. There isn't an Army camp around that hasn't had those problems. Let's back up, because you've mentioned it twice, and I'm not familiar with it. Where was Camp Ward? It doesn't exist anymore today. People may know Fort
Correct.
Wayne, but tell us a little bit about Camp Ward in Detroit.
Yes, Camp Ward was located where I believe, and I'm not from Detroit, so I don't know how they've changed the name a few times. Ralph Bunch Elementary School. There is an elementary school there, and some tennis courts, and some apartments nearby. And the historical marker is located in the back of that elementary school by a little roundabout.
There's another good example. There's another good example, Maurice Imhoff, of we don't pay any attention to history. We stuck that marker around back. Nobody will ever see it.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting spot. I don't know exactly why that location specifically was chosen. And two, I did have a little bit of conflicting research about where the camp was actually sitting at. It looks like, even in my opinion at least, it was actually sitting a little more closer to Elmwood Cemetery when I was comparing the maps. But I don't know. I wasn't there. And a neat little side story there, too, actually. That historical marker was dedicated in 1968, I believe, off the top of my head.
Oh, okay.
If you know Detroit, you know there was a significant event in 1967. So this historical marker was actually a part of rebuilding that Black community in Detroit, rebuilding everyone coming back together as a community. The governor was there, leaders of the NAACP were there. So this was kind of a way to look back at our history and see how far we have come and honor that history in a way.
Yeah, I'm seeing online that Camp Ward was on the Detroit's east side, where the Black Bottom neighborhood once stood, which got razed for some urban development plan. And there is some archaeological work going on trying to find more about the remnants of the camp and that sort of thing. So, again, we lose our history. That's why books like First Michigan Colored Regiment, Free Men Who Fought Slavery, is so important. Maurice, the men ended up fighting out of state at a couple of different battles. Can you tell us about that a little more specifically?
Sure. They fought a variety of different engagements in the South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida area. And before I dive into that, I'd like to say, like I used to say a little earlier, is these men were fighting for a different cause than all of the other rest of the Army. The African American men in the Army were fighting for freedom. And that's no doubt about it. That's what these guys are fighting for. Of course, they want to preserve the Union and as a whole, right? But these men were fighting for freedom and liberty. They're fighting now we said that we're fighting to free other people, right? But let's look closer into that as a young 18-year-old who made their way out of slavery and up to a free state. They're going back, and why are they joining? To free their mom, to free their dad, their girlfriend, their best friends who are still left in slavery. That's what these guys are fighting for. That's what they're thinking about.
Oh, that's
they're not thinking about American government.
That's right. That's a powerful way to look at it. And I suspect maybe in your reviewing letters and research, there was a certain element of respect too involved in what they were doing. They were earning the respect that they were entitled to. Were you able to find personal letters or journals or anything of that sort?
Absolutely. There was a couple good letters that came across to me, a collection. Sharon Hepburn, if I'm pronouncing that right, came across a great collection. I'm blanking on his name, of one African American soldier who was in the ranks. And then there was another collection by Sherry. Oh, I'm like, man, I feel so bad. Sherry, she came across the collection and transcribed some another soldier's letters. I believe it was Alonzo Reed. But then there were a couple officers, and one of my favorites was a surgeon. He was a white surgeon, younger guy, and he had a collection of letters he was writing back and forth to his wife. And which made this even better was he was writing back and forth to his wife, and he was knowledgeable. He knew how to read and write very well, and he shared every bit of his opinion. And what I mean by that too is you can think of a friend of yours who gets too into politics, and you ask one question and they're giving you a whole big load of how they feel. That was this guy. He gave you a big load of how he felt. But that was perfect because you're seeing right into how he feels. And at times, at first, honestly, he didn't like black men, it seemed. He was very new to it. I wouldn't say he didn't like them. I shall back that up. He was very new to it. He was from the Flint area, hadn't been around a very many black men. So when he got into the regiment, he referred to them to the hard R, the N word. He didn't know these guys, and through his time, through the letters back and forth, you see his opinion changes, and it changes quickly. Calling them brothers, and mad at the white men who he interacted with, who bashed his men, and treated them differently. He was. That was the golden mine.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that was the term I was going to use for a historian writing. Those personal letters are just gold because they give you a context you otherwise wouldn't have. But I interrupted you. They get down to South Carolina, which is a long way from Detroit, Georgia, and Florida. Talk about those battles as well.
Yeah, so their first battle is going to be in down the road from Olustee, Florida, near Jacksonville, in a place called, oh man, why do I usually know these names so well, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's just past Olustee, Florida, and I'm sorry, I just can't think of the name of it, but it's a small engagement, so to speak, anyways. So they're down there in northern Florida, and they're tearing up railroads, and they start to hit Baldwin, Florida. Thank you. It's between Jacksonville and Olustee, Baldwin, Florida, and they're tearing up these railroad tracks to try to stop the Confederate advance and supplies. And they begin to hear this noise. That noise goes louder and louder. Well, before they know it, I've been down to this area. It's thick pine trees, national forest woods. Before they know it, there's rebel cavalry pouring out of the woodwork, attacking them. This regiment is now in a little bit of panic, right? They've never seen combat, ever. The white officers who are leading these men have never seen their men fight. And if anything, they've been told by their comrades, have been told by their friends at home, these guys are going to drop their guns and they're going to run and you're going to die. You're a fool for joining this regiment. So they're nervous. What happens? The 102nd fixes their bayonets, fires a volley into the cavalry, and easily repels them. And not only do they fire a volley, after they fired, everyone's now empty, right? Everyone is completely empty.
Right.
What do they decide to do? They charge the cavalry by hand and easily repel them off without losing one man. And that told these white officers and everyone around, these men are here to do business, I tell people. So that's their first engagement. Up to their largest one at the Battle of Honey Hill, they see some other, small fights back and forth in the area. They fight next to the 54th and 55th Massachusetts, very famously known for the movie Glory, Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman. So they have some engagements in there, and Potter's Raid going through, trying to slow down the Confederate advance again, make them, want to stop fighting by messing up these towns a little bit. But their largest and most famous battle is the Battle of Honey Hill, South Carolina, where the regiment helps to return 3 cannons back from the battlefield, Union guns that had been decimated. The men had been. So they rush up, they grab the cannons, and they wheel them back while under fire. And what I mean by that is these men are literally getting shot in the arm and in the leg while moving these guns out in the woods, mind you, as well. And for that, Orson W. Bennett, who led that charge, was awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, Orson W. Bennett was a white man who was awarded the Medal of Honor. None of the black soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor for that action. However, I think, no one discredits, the work that he did to be able to lead that charge.
Well, that's interesting, and there's a long history of African American soldiers not getting recognized for doing more than others in battle, all the way up to most recently, the name that comes to my mind is Paris Davis in Vietnam, whose Medal of Honor package kept getting lost 4 or 5 times before it finally enough people got behind it and proved it up, and he got it. So very interesting that Orson Bennett got the recognition. When you got done researching this and writing this, what's your hope or expectation for capturing this history?
My hope is that it's not lost. And that's kind of what it had been for a period of time, really, until the 80s, when these African-American living historians got involved in Lansing and wanted to share this history. And that the story gets told. And when I think about that as a young man who is a descendant of slaves from Georgia, I think about how all of those young men, including older men, right, joined this. I mean, they gave up their freedom. I mean, they were literally just free. I mean, think of if you were born into a prison and then you get out of that prison and the first thing you do is go back to potentially be put back in that prison.
Right.
Let's get some scary stuff. All of these guys who put their freedom on the line and their life on the line and then sacrificed their life, honestly, as well, for freedom, to have what we have today. I mean, I think, sometimes we don't need to always focus on the past. It's important that we move forward as a country and move forward as society. But sometimes we need to, think back about how we have these, why we have these freedoms. I mean, I go to the store, I can get a McDonald's hamburger. I don't know, I can go to Meijer. I mean, I can live my regular day life. But how did I earn that? In a way, how did we get to that point? And without the sacrifices of our soldiers from all of these wars, I wouldn't be able to do that. No. And that's where I think it is so important that we think about it. That's why I'm honored to have a group. I have a group of 40 young students, all high school and college students, with me who teach this history in our living history group. And we want to be able to share not only to the general public, but to our fellow brothers and sisters that we need to cherish this history. So that is that's my biggest hope, that it will continue to be cherished, shared, and people learn that African American men were the victors of the Civil War, not the victims. I mean, these guys took up arms and they did their fair share.
No, that's a great message. We should learn from this history and apply it today. Maurice Imhoff, I really appreciate you taking some time today to talk about this history, to talk about the 1st Michigan Colored Regiment, free men who fought slavery, and congratulate you on getting this out, and keep up the good work.
Well, thank you so much. I never intended really on having a publication, but it came to me, and I had everything sitting in a pile, and the time is now, and I'm really happy with how it came out.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows
by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA, can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.